So good morning, everyone. We're going to start the meeting now. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to grab a bite. We're going to start the meeting, so if you guys want to grab a seat, I would appreciate that. Steve, would you help me out here, Steve? Woo! That's my boy, Steve Aquino. Give him a round of applause, okay? Steve's one of the only ones who's been the chair of the board 2 separate years, and it's largely because he can do that. So I want to just thank you, Steve. Anyways, my name's Mike. I'm president of the chamber. Been here now for 14 years. I love this specific meeting. It's great to bring you all together, vote in the next group of people to be on our board, and hear from Mr. Anirban Basu. It's our first year doing it here at the Pleasant Valley Fire Hall. I want to thank these guys. Give them a round of applause. They do a great job. They get in here like at 5 a.m. to make this happen, so that they should get an award. I also want to thank the Community Media Center. They're filming this, and it's going to be rebroadcast, hopefully I get this right, on Comcast High Def 1072, Channel 19, their YouTube channel, and their Facebook page. So it's going to be all over the place. So if you have to leave early or you know somebody that wanted to come and couldn't, they're going to be able to watch that. I want to thank all the sponsors that we have. Oh, and if you could turn your cell phones off, please put them on quiet. And I want to introduce the MC of the day. As we normally do, we bring up the chair of our board. And this year, for our 100-year anniversary, how about a round of applause for that? 100 years, that's pretty amazing. Next year, it'll be 101, so we won't be able to make that big of a deal out of it. But I want to bring up right now our MC, Andrea Bursler, who's Executive Director of Carroll County Libraries. Andrea, come on up.
Thank you, Mike. And good morning, everyone. Oh, come on. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I have to be up and chipper this early in the morning. You all can be chipper, too. All right. So welcome. I am the Executive Director of the Carroll County Public Library. It is a great job. I really enjoy it. And I also have enjoyed being chair for the chamber for the last 8 months now, 9 months. We have the 10 months, oh my gosh, time flies. We have a great time at the chamber. You all who are members, if you want to get involved, do it. See Mike, volunteer for a committee. Come to the board meetings, they are open. Show up at the events. It is a wonderful partnership between businesses, government, and nonprofit, which is very much the hallmark of Carroll County, that we work together so wonderfully well. So those are my comments. It says make comments. Those are my comments, so there you go. I do want to recognize, I have a list of people we want to recognize and thank for making time on their very busy schedules to be with us here today. So we have, and I'm going to kind of go through these. We have quite a list. So we start with Carroll County State's Attorney Haven Shoemaker is with us. If you want to give a wave or say hello. There you go. We have with us all of the Carroll County Commissioners, President Kenny Kyler, Vice President Joe Vigliotti, Tom Gordon, Ed Rothstein, and Michael Guerin. Thank you all. And since they're all here, County Administrator Roberta Wyndham's here to keep an eye on them all. So thank you, Roberta, for showing up. The director of our county Department of Economic Development, Denise Beaver, is also with us this morning. There she is. We have a few members from our Board of Ed with us this morning. The president of the board, Marcia Herbert, Patricia Dorsey, and Steve Whistler. We also have the superintendent of schools, Cindy McCabe, with us this morning. From Westminster City, we have Councilman Tony Cavacci and Dan Hoff. And from Tawnytown, we have council members Diane Foster and Chris Tillman. The president of Carroll Community College, Rose Mintz, is with us this morning. We have several past chairs. When you're 100 years old, you have a lot of past chairs. So please stand up as I call your name and be recognized. Wayne Barnes from R. Wayne Barnes Life and Long-Term Care. Steve Aquino of Aquino Financial Group. Steve has to stand up twice because he's been the board twice. Dave Bollinger from Barnes Bollinger Insurance. Steve Wance from Carroll Community College. Suzette Colvert from Farmers and Merchants Bank. Ben Yingling from Crawford Yingling Insurance. And Dennis Twig of Hoffman Comfort, Hoffett, Scott, and Halstead. You guys really need to shorten that name. Okay. Will all the current members of the Chamber Board of Directors please stand up? I know who you are. I will come find you. All right. Congratulations. Thank you all for your service. Okay. I think we've gotten everybody. Am I missing any past chairs or elected officials or anybody else who wants us to say good morning to them? Okay. Very good. So, it helps if you have the right page. If I skip a page, that's going to be a problem. Once a year at the annual meeting, oh, Mike, I think this one's yours. Our members elect 6 directors. Would you like me to handle that? Okay. He's still having breakfast. It's fine. I told you the board meetings were fine. Once a year at the Chamber's annual meeting, our members elect 6 directors for the 3-year terms that begin the following January. 5 of the current directors whose first terms expired on December 31st are eligible to serve second terms, and they've agreed to do so. So we thank them very much for that. These 5 members are Dr. Julia Jaskin of McDaniel College, Dr. Cindy McCabe of the Carroll County Schools, Lindy McNulty of Gizmos Art, Lenny Mills from Shelter Systems, and John Wheatman of Jonathan Wheatman, Attorney at Law. Please join me in thanking them for being willing to serve a second term. On behalf of the Chamber, the Board of Directors, and our Chamber staff, we also want to say a special word of thanks to Val Giovanni. I'm sorry, Val, I can never get the name right. Giovagnoni, thank you, of Ting, who is finishing her 2nd consecutive 3-year term and will be stepping off the board. Val has contributed an awful lot to the board, and we want to thank her for her service. All right, to fill the vacancy of Val's leaving the board, the Chamber Executive Committee, with the approval of the Board of Directors, has nominated Megan Plumley of Plumley Creative to serve on the board. So the Chamber Board therefore recommends that the membership elect the following 6 individuals with 3-year terms beginning on January 1st, 2025. Julia Jaskin, Cindy McCabe, Lindy McNulty, Lenny Mills, John Wheatman, and Megan Plumley. So I believe, let's see here, we want to remind you that during this portion of the event, only 1 representative from each member organization should vote or otherwise act as a voice for the Chamber meeting. So to get to the business on the floor, I need a motion to approve the recommended slate of directors from the board. Steve, okay. And do I have a second to the motion? All right, Richard. The motion is made and seconded. Is there any other discussion or any other nominations from the floor? Do we have any volunteers? All right, no other discussion being had. We will move to a vote. All those in favor of approving the slate of officers as proposed, please say aye. Any opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. Congratulations and welcome to the board. All right, so we have several sponsors for this morning's event, and I'm going to introduce these sponsors and have them come up for some brief comments. The library is the first sponsor, and so my comments are really brief. We're delighted to always work with the Chamber. The partnership between the Public Library and the Chamber of Commerce is a strong one, and one that I think benefits both organizations and also benefits the community. If you haven't been in the library for a while, I challenge you to show up and come to some of our programs, because I think you'll be surprised at the breadth and the scope of programming and resources that we offer the community. So please make sure to take some time, stop by your local branch, renew your library card, and check out all of the wonderful things that your public library has for you every day. That's my speech. Our next sponsor is Steve Aquino. Steve is the owner and founder of Aquino Financial Group, LLC. Steve?
Good morning, and thank you, Andrea. I appreciate that. Again, I'm Steve Aquino of Aquino Financial Group, an independent wealth management firm here in Westminster. And as mentioned before, I was very proud to serve as 2 terms as chair of the board for the Carroll County Chamber of Commerce, and I definitely did miss being on the board last year. I'll be back. Oh, geez. And I do appreciate the time to be able to say a few words here for such a great event. Anirban always brings, great information, and hopefully he brought his crystal ball again this year about the interesting economic and the times that we are living in. And just so you know, Mike wasn't kidding when he said he's going to start keeping a tally of all your predictions for the upcoming year and kind of compare them each year. So be aware of that. As a wealth manager, I've been getting a lot of questions about what's been happening in this volatile world that we're living in today. So it's important to make sure that your goals, dreams, and what's important to you are coordinated with your financial plan and investments. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns of where you are these days in your financial planning stage of life, and I'd be more than happy to sit down and have a discussion with you. So thank you very much and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Steve. We always appreciate Steve. He's a real, I know he's on Mike's short list for, we're going to do this, Steve. Can you help us out? He's great. Yeah, and don't say about being on the board again, because you're just setting yourself up for next year. We also have the Chamber's media sponsor for so many events is the Community Media Center. So we have Richard Turner, the executive director, here to give us a few comments.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be the media sponsor. Get more information into our community. That's our role, our mission, and our purpose. I hope that you enjoy our programming. A note of change, because Comcast and their thousands of channels have decided 1086 wasn't good enough for us and we ought to be on 1072. So if you've been looking for us on cable, we've moved from 1086 now to 1072. That's where all our high definition content, like some of the content that we're doing today, as well as our sports programming, some of the great programming their staff does, and involved in partnering with you in our community. So it's important that we do that, because otherwise, you won't hear about what's going on in our community. It's important from the standpoint of our election coverage. If you're looking for more information about who's running for office, you can go to our website and see our election guide, which has statements from the people who are running for office, of course, our Board of Education, as well as the forums that we've done in the community. So you can find all that on our website. Be an informed voter and vote. And then, in addition, we're starting a new series this year, right here at Island Green. So come join us, because it's at Island Green Monday nights at 6 o'clock, and you'll hear we have sports talk at Island Green. It's a coach's corner, and we're now focusing on McDaniel sports as well. So you get to have a little bit of fun out in the community, as well as be part of the audience for our show, or check it out live on 1072, right? Not 1086, but 1072. And so with that, thanks for all of the support. We appreciate the partnership. And I'll turn it back over. Oh, and thanks again to folks here, our first responders at Pleasant Valley. It's not just a great hall, they're our first responders. Thank you.
So all right, I wanted to check with Richard that they do the community college ones, because I found out this morning that the first year, inaugural year of women's soccer at the community college, they are going to the playoffs. And they have a home game, right, Steve? Their first game is actually a home game. So kudos to the community college for that. Wait, #1 fan. We love it. Absolutely great. And you can also watch that on CMC. So wonderful. So our silver sponsor is ACNB Bank and ACNB Insurance Services. Representing them both is ACNB Bank Executive Vice President and Maryland Market President, Mark Blackston. Mark, would you like to come up and say a few words?
You did. Thank you so much.
I want to see you put that all on one card.
Oh, it's a long one. It's like this big. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And it's so exciting to be here to listen to Dr. Basu. I'm always enamored with his throwbacks to movies. I'm a big movie buff too, so I'm really excited to hear what the good, bad, and the ugly are all about today. ACMB Bank and ACMB Insurance Services are part of the ACMB universe. I'm going to coin, I'll give you your fee there, Mike. That was a good way to phrase that. No, but we're super excited to be able to sponsor this evening with some other great organizations. So real quick, show of hands, how many of you woke up this morning thinking about your bank? Laughs, crickets. I mean, I work at one, and okay, you guys don't count. Okay, I work at one, and I didn't do it either. So, for most people, banking is a utility. It's a tool, and it's one important thing that we need, but it's functional. So when you need to deposit your paycheck, you open a checking account. When you need a car, you take out a loan. When you need to buy a new home, you get a mortgage. And when you're running a business, you rely on cash management and merchant services. And that's okay. We all deserve a bank that functions well for us, and there are so many to choose from. But here's the thing. The right bank doesn't just serve a function, it serves a purpose. And that's the community bank difference. And I get a lot of questions about that, like what makes the difference between a community bank, a regional bank, a mega bank, and that's really the difference. So that's often we say here at ACMB, where you bank matters, because it really does. I think it's safe to assume that everyone here in this room believes in the power of the community. I mean, you're here today, right? It's really important to us to make sure Carroll County is we're here for the chamber event. We're all invested in the success of local businesses and the strength of our local economies. And my friend Mike always says, and is always championing, the power of shopping local, going to local restaurants, supporting family-owned stores, and he says it loud and he says it often. So here, I'm just here to challenge you to say bank local too. That's really important to us. It's really important to the community. I'm really proud of the team that we have here in Carroll County. We have 5 offices throughout the county. We're partnered with some great folks at the ACMB Insurance Services, which are headquartered right here in Carroll County. So check us out. We'd love to work with you. And thanks again for the opportunity, and you all have a great day.
Wonderful. All right. And now, on to our keynote speaker. Anirban Basu is the chair and CEO of Sage Policy Group. Anirban has been called an economist with a sense of humor. He has been named one of Baltimore Region's 20 most powerful business leaders. In 2014, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan appointed Dr. Basu as chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission, a position he held through 2021. Dr. Basu currently serves on the boards of the University of Maryland School of Law, St. Mary's College, the University of Maryland Medical Center, the University System of Maryland Foundation, the Lyric Opera House, and the Archdiocese of Baltimore School Systems. I don't know when you find any time to sleep, Dr. Basu. Please join me in giving a warm Carroll County welcome to Dr. Anirban Basu. Would you like this here?
Righto, thank you very much. Thanks for being here. And this gives us an opportunity to talk about where we are in the business cycle, what this means for Maryland and Carroll County, so on and so forth. We've got some incredible students and future leaders in the back, as it turns out, from the Academy of Finance, and I hope I got that right. And so, again, and I will leave some time at the end of this presentation for questions and answers. There are screens across the room, around the room, so hopefully there's a screen near you to make these slides accessible. But I will talk about more than simply what's on the slides. My presentation today, as had been kindly noted, is the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is a Clint Eastwood themed presentation. You'll see that theming throughout the presentation, whether you like it or not. I hope you don't hate it, but it's firmly baked in the cake. And today I have the privilege of sharing with you some good, some bad, and some ugly. But I will start out, as it turns out, with the good. And there's actually been a fair amount of good. In particular, the fact that the U.S. economy has held up so much better than many people had presumed. There was a conventional wisdom coming into last year, coming into 2023, that recession was inevitable in America. Indeed, the economists at Bloomberg, that source of phenomenal business intelligence, maintain a forecasting index. And as of October of 2022, that forecasting index was suggesting that the probability of recession in America was 100%. And you may be aware that that is the highest possible probability. That in fact, and again, this is for the students, you cannot get above 100% unless, of course, you're talking about the Baltimore Ravens defense, which, as you've heard, gives 110%. But otherwise, 100% is the most. 2022 was a terrible year for U.S. equity markets. It was also the year that interest rates began to take off, and these were thought to be precursors to a broad-based economic downturn. By many measures, it simply has not occurred. The broadest indication of that is U.S. gross domestic product, our measure of national output. Quarterly data, annualized rates of growth. Much of the data I will share with you this morning are time series data, so the more contemporary data are to the right of the slide. Now, we're neatly ensconced, of course, in the fourth quarter of 2024, but we don't yet have third quarter gross domestic product data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So the final bar here is for the second quarter of 2024, and during that second quarter, the U.S. economy expands 3% on an annualized basis. And because we do not have third quarter GDP data. The current quarter, statistically speaking, is the third quarter, and the Atlanta Federal Reserve maintains a product that estimates current quarter GDP, and their estimate for the third quarter is that the U.S. economy expanded 3.4% on an annualized basis. Again, above trend rates of growth. And of course, certain parts of the economy have outperformed others, and at the heart of that statement is the American consumer, who remains on a spending tear. This is monthly retail sales. Last three bars here are July, August, and September. Consumer continues to spend aggressively. Now you might say, well, Anirban, they're spending aggressively because they're paying such high prices, so they're having to spend aggressively. That's part of it. But in many categories, consumers are spending right through those higher prices. In other words, they're still buying. Oh, occasionally you hear stories about things like Starbucks, the occasional customer has disappeared, the customers who came in during the pandemic or during the early stages of recovery therefrom, that they're no longer there, and we'll talk about why that might be. The CEO, by the way, Starbucks just replaced its CEO. The former CEO's name was Lakshman Narasimhan, looks a lot like me. The new CEO is Brian Niccol, looks nothing like me. But the point is, the CEO from Five Below also just simply walked away from the job because things got tough there. So you hear stories like that, but by and large, consumers are spending, and actually much of the growth in consumer outlays recently has not been on retailed items here depicted, but rather on services, things like travel. So every once in a while, the Americans will set another record for the number of people passing through TSA checkpoints on a single day. They're spending on Beyonce concert tickets. They're spending on Taylor Swift concert tickets. In August of 2023, the average Taylor Swift concert ticket purchased on resale, and that's how people buy them on resale, sold for $1,619 per ticket. She sold out football stadiums across this country, often multiple times in the same week. She just parenthetically toured Australia. The Australian government thanked her for improving their economy. She generated about $300 million of economic impact in 4 days. She's not merely a musical phenomenon, she's an economic one. And I would say to you that this thing between her and Travis Kelce is pretty much the greatest thing ever. This is precisely what this nation needed during these challenging times. It's phenomenal, it's fantastic, it is fabulous. It is not at all annoying. And what you have here is this hunky athlete from the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-time Super Bowl winning tight end Travis Kelce, in a relationship with the savvy singer-songwriter Taylor Swift. There are pictures of them kissing on the internet. Now, some of that's artificially generated, but the point is this has many Americans aglow, abuzz, and hopeful. And there is reason for hope. Because unlike many stories, this one stands to end well, because when that breakup occurs, and it will occur, the music is going to flow, and I, for one, cannot wait. Now, I'm going to make the case that the consumer cannot continue to spend as they have been. At the heart of that statement is American demography. So what I'm doing for you here is I'm breaking down American wealth by percentile. These are Federal Reserve Bank data. So I'm just stacking the most affluent households in America down to the least affluent. So if you look at the teal-colored slice at the top of the slide, that's the wealth controlled by the top 0.1% of Americans. That's 335,000 Americans, roughly. And that 0.1% of Americans controls 13.5% of the nation's wealth. America, of course, is a phenomenally wealthy nation, but the wealth is not evenly distributed. Now, if you look at the balance of the top 1%, so they're represented in that green slice there. So that's your 99th percentile to your 99.9th percentile. They control another 16.7% of the nation's wealth. So the top 1% of Americans controls a bit more than 30% of the nation's wealth. The yellow segment there is the balance of the top 10%. So that's your 90th percentile to your 99th percentile. They control another 36.6% or 36.5% of the nation's wealth. So the top 10% controls almost precisely 2/3 of the nation's wealth. The brown segment below that is for the 50th to the 90th percentile. So that's precisely 40% of America's population, of course, and that 40% controls a bit less than 31% of the nation's wealth, which means that the bottom 50% of Americans control approximately 2.5% of the nation's wealth. So the top 50%, 97.5%, bottom 50%, 2.5%. Some of these folks are homeowners, by the way. The home ownership rate in America is meaningfully above 60%, so some of that wealth is in home equity, but these are generally speaking people who don't have much financial wealth. They don't have much financial wealth upon which to lean. They often live paycheck to paycheck. Well, here's the good news. There have been lots of paychecks in America, and presumably there will be more. This from the JOLTS, the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. In August, America home to 8.04 million available unfilled jobs. You might say, Anirban, the number of job openings has been falling. That's true. The labor market is normalizing post-pandemic. But if you compare the number of job openings in August against where we were pre-pandemic, when the economy was considered to be very, very strong, back then we had a 3.5% rate of unemployment in this country, at that point a 50-year low. We had about 7 million available unfilled jobs, now 8 million. We have more than one job opening for every unemployed American, and many employers in this room would agree that their number one challenge in the most recent years has been finding talent to do the work. It's not been about deal flow. It's about finding the talent, the people who are committed sufficiently to do the work, to provide excellent customer service, those kinds of things, to problem identify, problem solve, to critically think and critically analyze. Those kinds of people have been rare. And of course, when a nation enters each and every month with plentiful numbers of job openings, it's quite likely that that particular month, the nation will end up adding jobs on net, which is precisely what has happened since December of 2020, the last month that America lost jobs. So whether it's been wildfires or hurricanes or congressional elections or bridge collapses, America has managed to add jobs every month since December of 2020. Now, we'll see what happens next month. So we'll get a jobs report 4 days before the presidential election, before the elections, November 1st, that will relate to October. That could be a really crazy jobs number because the so-called reference week, the week during which the survey took place, overlaps with Hurricane Milton. So we'll see, and then of course that ravaged Florida, lots of evacuation from the Tampa metropolitan area. It's a massive metropolitan area, and so we'll see what that does to the jobs numbers. But heretofore, America's added jobs each and every month, and in September, the number came in at a massive 254,000 net new jobs, well above consensus expectations. Now, of course, as with any data, you want to take these data with a grain or two or three or maybe 5 or 6 grains of salt. You might have heard that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which supplies these data, recently revised lower their estimate for job creation for the 1 year ended in March by 818,000. And the confidence band around the 254,000 jobs added in September is 134,000 jobs in either direction. Nonetheless, many employers would agree it's a tight labor market. Of course, one of the things that we learned overnight is that the machinists at Boeing did not ratify that agreement put forth by management. That strike continues. Of course, we've had a lot of conflict between labor and management in recent years. We had strikes last year among actors and writers, for instance. That's one of the reasons we did not have an early summer movie blockbuster. So last year, we had Barbenheimer, Barbie and Oppenheimer, quite different films, by the way, but still both hits. This year, it took a long time to get that first summer blockbuster turned out to be Deadpool and Wolverine, and I thank them both for that. But we did not produce much content during the strikes. We had strikes among UAW members, meaning United Auto Workers members, so on and so forth. We had a strike a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, from the International Longshoremen's Association, the ILA. It lasted just 3 days. By the way, 8.3% of all longshoremen are longshore women, as it turns out. But nonetheless, lots of conflict. Now, some negotiations have not ended in strikes, as it turns out. I'll give you an example. The negotiations between United Parcel Service, UPS, and the Teamsters Union, those negotiations produced a 5-year agreement, and during the 5th year of that agreement, the average full-time UPS truck driver will be earning $170,000 per year. That's $170K. That's wages plus benefits, but it's $170K, forcing people like myself to ask the question, how do I look in brown? Based on the app, spectacular. But the point is, that's great for consumption. We've seen a lot of wage growth in recent years, and so we've been in the midst of this virtuous cycle in which consumers have been spending, impacted employers have been hiring, fueling further spending. And that's where we are. Now, what about Carroll County and Maryland, you ask? Well, let's talk about that. Maryland. Now, this says Maryland non-farm employment because that's the way the data come to us from the federal government. The farm employment data are captured by a different agency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and are not additive to these, which come from the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. So what I'm doing for you here is I'm comparing job totals in February of 2020. Why that month? That's the last month before we shut down the economy. The public health emergency is declared on March 13th of 2020, so I'm using February of 2020 as the pre-pandemic baseline of employment and comparing that employment tally to September of 2024, the last month which we have data. Now this is roughly a 4.5-year period comparison. And over that 4.5-year period, the nation added 6.8 million jobs, meaning that it grew its employment base by 4.5%. Over that same span, Maryland lost 14,000 jobs. We're one of the weakest state economies in the country. Maryland is almost precisely 2% of the nation's economy. So we should have probably added around 140,000 jobs during this period if we were an average state. If we were average, we lost 14,000. Now, this, of course, translates into a diminished tax base and all kinds of other things. And this, of course, is a state that is governed in a way, we're very ambitious. So we want to put more money into public education. Not saying that's bad or good, that's for you to decide. But if you don't have the tax base to do it, it makes things more difficult. Wants to build a red line in Baltimore. I'm not saying that's good or bad, that's for you to decide. But it's expensive, you don't have the tax base, it's difficult to accomplish. So the state has underperformed. By the way, to our immediate south, you have some of the best performing state economies in the country: Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, so on and so forth. So it is possible in this part of the country to generate a lot of growth and prosperity. We just have not done it in this state for various reasons. Leisure and hospitality has been the category that's lost the most jobs. That's your hotel and restaurant workers. Construction is down, finance is down, so on and so forth. Manufacturing jobs are down. It's not been great for Maryland. Now I can continue on this regional story. This is employment growth for the 25 largest metropolitan areas in America, February of 2020 versus September of 2024. Again, that comparison period of roughly 4.5 years, a bit more than that. The fastest growing metropolitan areas are ensconced in this left-hand column. There's a neat correspondence between population growth and job growth, and in recent years, no region of the country has added more people in absolute terms than the Dallas metropolitan area. North Texas is booming. By the way, no region of the country overpays their quarterback as much as the Dallas metropolitan area. And I'm persuaded that these things are purely coincidental. But the point is, it's the American South. That's where the population growth has been. That's where the job growth has been. Now, that Dallas, San Antonio, Tampa, Phoenix, Charlotte, Orlando, Houston, Riverside, Atlanta, Miami, the American South. For the most part, the Northeast corridor is in the right-hand column: New York Metro, Washington Metro, Boston, this region of Baltimore, again, one of the slower-growing regions of the country, along with the monsters of the Midwest, those gigantic metropolitan areas like Chicago Metro, Detroit Metro, and Minneapolis. Less population growth has translated into less job growth in those regions. Now, I find this slide to be quite interesting, but the next slide is far more important macroeconomically. Same 25 major metropolitan areas, but instead of employment growth, these are rates of unemployment, and this is unfortunately only through August. We're still waiting for the September data on metropolitan area unemployment, but nonetheless it tells a story, a new story. So for the last few years we've been talking about an unusually low unemployment rate, and it's still quite low, 4.1% nationally, but if you look at some of these regions right here at the bottom of the right-hand column, you'll notice that unemployment is no longer that low. Los Angeles Metro, massive metropolitan area, obviously 6.2%. Riverside, California, 6%. Chicagoland, 5.6%. New York Metro, the largest metropolitan area, 5.3%. Not that low. So there is some evidence that the labor market is starting to fray around the edges, that this virtuous cycle we've been living in is starting to break apart just a bit. Will it continue to? Well, that'll be the subject of my speculation later in the presentation. The other thing about it is we've been focusing a lot on the consumer, and that's important because the consumer is roughly 2/3 of aggregate demand. Actually, roughly 70% of demand comes from the American household. So you cannot have an economic downturn unless the consumer participates. I mean, the consumer is typically not the prime mover with respect to fomenting a downturn. It's often a dot-com bust or a housing market bubble bursting or COVID or something like that, but the consumer has to participate at some point in the dynamic for there to be an economic downturn. And again, the consumer has not been participating in any kind of downturn. But there's a flip side to all this wage growth, of course, and all this spending. It's inflationary. And of course, when you have more inflation, meaning the pace of price increases is faster, it also translates to higher interest rates, and that takes me to the next part of the presentation, as it turns out. Well, actually, let me just drill down this a little bit further on this. This is Carroll County unemployment rate. You might have noticed here some breaking down here. Unemployment has started to rise. It's just 2.8%. Don't get excited, people. But it is up. it has been rising. We see this across Maryland. Again, that labor market starting to fall apart. We see more layoff announcements. I'll give you an example. Walmart just closed a store in Towson. And so that, more than 100 people lost their jobs. That's the kind of thing that's happening. And of course, some of those shoppers that were shopping at that Towson Walmart, Putty Hill Avenue, so on and so forth, are now coming up to Carroll County to shop, as you know. By the way, I don't know if you appreciate this. I think you do. The growth pressures on Carroll County are going to be massive during the years ahead because there's so much disenchantment in Baltimore County. People in Baltimore County are really looking to move. And they look at Carroll County and say, and I know a lot of people in Carroll County wish you were not on the map, literally not on the map, so people cannot find you. I know that. But you are on the map. They put you on the map. There's GPS and all kinds of things now, and so they can find you. They can find Westminster. They can, and Finksburg too. So, but the point is, unemployment is starting to rise. Again, you see this around the country. I'll come back to this later. Now, there's a measure called employment by place of residence. So that's what this is. So this is not the number of jobs in Carroll County. This is the number of people who live in Carroll County that has a job. So population here is around 178,000, I believe, something like that. So this is the population of people who have a job, wherever that job is. It can be Baltimore City, Washington, D.C., York, Pennsylvania, wherever it happens to be. So you can see the dip in Carroll County employment by place of residence here during the early stages of the pandemic and the recovery. If you compare versus February of 2020, again, the month before we shut down the economy, Carroll County has 3,619 fewer people living here that has a job than pre-pandemic. Now, the population hasn't fallen, so what's happened here, of course, is that many of these folks who have been living in Carroll County were working pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic, or at least subsequently thereafter, they have now retired. They're still living in Carroll County, but they're now retirees. Now, as that population continues to age and at some point starts to move out, that's going to, of course, create opportunities for younger folks. And that's when you're going to see some rush of Baltimore County and other residents come into this county. I'm not saying that's good or bad, just expect that dynamic, especially as mortgage rates fall over the next couple of years. That might be something you really see. And that's good and bad news, of course, with respect to that kind of movement. Okay, enough of that. We talked about this notion of this strong labor market, all this wage pressure translating to inflation. That brings me to the bad. Is this recovery sustainable is the question on the table. And again, you have to start that story with the consumer because they're of such outsized importance. So let's start with the consumer. This is a measure called personal savings. These data come from the San Francisco Federal Reserve, but they're for the nation. Personal savings measured in hundreds of billions of dollars. If you look at the green line toward the bottom of the slide, you can see this neat trajectory, smooth trajectory in personal savings as we head toward the pandemic. But then the pandemic, of course, changes everything. Because during the pandemic, some people start receiving stimulus payments, almost everybody. Business operators receive paycheck protection payments. And of course, for many workers, their wages expanded rapidly during the pandemic. And of course, we thank them for working through the pandemic, whether at inpatient medical centers, outpatient clinics, construction job sites, et cetera. And so that meant that household income was rising precisely as household expenditures were diving. Because people were not taking vacations. They weren't seeing movies or going to theaters. They weren't seeing Beyonce or Taylor Swift in concert, even Ice Spice or SZA. And so, according to the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank economists, at the pinnacle, they amassed about $2.1 trillion in excess savings, meaning savings above and beyond what they would have saved but for the pandemic. According to those same economists, all of those savings and then some have now been spent. Now, as that money was spent, of course, it juiced the economy. So if you look at the GDP data from the end of last year, third quarter of 2023, 4.9% growth on an annualized basis. Fourth quarter, 3.4%, phenomenal. But now you're left increasingly with a consumer who has spent down their pandemic-era savings and continues to face high and rising prices as measured, for instance, by the Consumer Price Index. 12% change in prices as measured by the CPI. There are two lines here. The dashed green line represents the overall rate of inflation. So what this says is that between September of 2023 and September of 2024, overall inflation rising 2.4%. And you say, Anirban, partial victory. Because back in June of 2022, inflation, again, the pace at which prices are rising over any given period, inflation on an annual basis was 9.1%. Now it's down to 2.4%. And if you do the simple extrapolation, 2% inflation, which of course is the Federal Reserve's target for inflation, their measure of price stability, must be right around the corner. Now, if you strip out food and energy prices, you get a darker line, this blue line. So that's the so-called core rate of inflation. That's 3.3%. But still, generally speaking, has been in decline. So all this is quite news. And in fact, if I showed you different measures like 3-month moving averages or 6-month moving averages, you would see inflation is right around 2%, in some cases less than 2% by certain measures. But here's the thing. These prices are rising off an already lofty level. If I said to you that, oh, Johns Hopkins increases tuition just 3%, you'd say, well, but tuition was already high. It was already a big number. Another 3%, come on. Exactly. So again, you're left with a consumer who has spent down their pandemic year savings, and the prices keep rising on them. And where's the inflation coming from? That's what this slide gets at. This is, again, year-over-year percentage change in prices as measured by the Consumer Price Index. Headline numbers are repeated for you down below: 2.4% overall inflation, 3.3% on the so-called core, all items less food and energy. But the green-colored bars show you what's happening categorically. Number one category here in terms of percentage increase in prices over the past year, transportation services. Well, of course. If you're going to pay the UPS truck driver that much money, someone's going to have to pay for that. Now, I do not begrudge the UPS driver that level of compensation, not at all. These are very special people. They have to be able to drive a large vehicle, park it, lift heavy objects all day long as much as 70 pounds, and pass a drug test. Most Americans cannot do all of those things, but it's inflationary. All right, so, and by the way, the effect of this inflation is cumulative. So this burst of excess inflation, meaning inflation above the Federal Reserve's 2% target, really comes forth in early 2021, around March. So if I were to take you back in time to, let's say, May of 2020, why that month? That's the first month of the economic recovery. So America loses 22 million jobs in March and April of 2020. We began to add back jobs in May of 2020, and according to the National Bureau of Economic Research's Business Cycle Dating Committee, the recession officially ended in April of 2020. So if I take you back to May of 2020, and look at prices back then as measured by the Consumer Price Index, and compare those to September of 2024, here's inflation over that period. It's a bit more than 4 years. A bit more than 4.25 years. So overall inflation over that 4+ year period, 23% in a country that aspires to 2% inflation per annum. Strip out food and energy prices, still lofty, 21%. Now categorically in green, energy prices up more than 50%. Transportation services up 47%. Shelter prices, that includes things like apartment rents, up 24%. And one of the biggest categories in my mind here, food, up 24%. And that's what has a lot of Americans upset. A lot of people in Washington, D.C. are surprised about this. Why are people unhappy with the economy, they ask? Got a 4.1% rate of unemployment, 8 million job openings, record stock market, though last few days have not been that great on the stock market. Futures are up today. What are people upset about right here? They can't afford their lives. I talk to a lot of Americans about the economy. It's one of the things I do. And often these conversations transpire in Ubers and Lyfts. And I take a lot of Ubers and Lyfts. And some of you also take lots of Ubers and Lyfts. And therefore, those of you who do that know that as a passenger, you rate the driver, you may be less aware that the driver rates you as a passenger. And I have recently become privy to my passenger ratings, and they're extremely low. And you might say, well, that makes sense. We've seen you speak before, sir. I think this is beyond my personality. I think there is something else afoot, because I take every Uber or Lyft trip as an opportunity to interview an American. And I'll ask them questions like, and of course I'm doing this from the back seat, hey, how much do you really make doing this on an hourly basis once you factor in depreciation and insurance? You know, what's your highest level of education attainment? What other options did you have? Did you have any? Does your family approve? Why would you choose this vehicle in particular? And apparently, these questions are off-putting. But when you ask people about the economy, they'll tell you, hey, this is why I'm so upset. I can't keep up. I keep driving longer and longer hours. I can't keep up, but I want to try. Because once you establish a certain standard of living, once you have a certain quality of apartment, a certain caliber of restaurants you frequent, a certain caliber of vacation you take, you don't want to give that up, even if that improvement in standard of living is driven by ostensibly temporary factors like stimulus payments. But if the pandemic or savings are gone, and the prices keep rising, what do people do? Well, of course, they turn to the credit card. New York Federal Reserve Bank data regarding credit card debt in America, it is spiking. Now, some economists will make the point, hey, this economist is making too big a deal out of this because he's not just these data for inflation. Fair enough. If I were to adjust these data for inflation, things would look a bit better, no question. Nonetheless, an increasing number of Americans are having a tough time fulfilling their basic financial obligations. This is percentage of balances 30+ days delinquent by loan type. And delinquency is rising. The green line is credit card delinquency. It's rising. Now, again, economists would say, not a big deal, because delinquency is rising off a low level. So it might be something to watch for, but it's not problematic as of now. Now, I view that as the optimistic perspective. But I'm no optimist. I am among the most pessimistic people you will ever encounter. Didn't have a girlfriend in high school, didn't really have one in college. I'm from Baltimore. So I expect bad things to happen all the time. And when I look at this, I say, oh, this doesn't look so good. And by the way, it's not in isolation. The yellow line is our loan delinquency. It's rising. Mortgage delinquency is in brown. It's rising. Now, again, off an absurdly low level. Fair enough. But it's rising. More people are missing their mortgage payments. And that tells us that there's more stress. That's a fairly important payment to miss. And that tells me that also that the household stress is moving up the socioeconomic ladder to now engulf a certain proportion of homeowners. So now, this deterioration, as it turns out, is not surprising. There are a group of policymakers in Washington, D.C. wanted to slow down the economy, wanted to generate actually increasingly inferior economic results because they wanted to bring inflation down to 2%. So they drove up interest rates. Here's an interest rate of interest. These are commercial bank interest rates on credit card plans. I was taught in school that the most important price in the economy is the interest rate. So when I saw interest rates take off, what was I thinking naively, as it turns out? That consumers, faced with these higher borrowing costs, would spend less aggressively, borrow less aggressively. Oh no, they spent right through it. There's a phenomenon called buy now, pay later. Buy now, pay later. Americans are very good at buy now. The pay later part is proving more problematic. And again, this has been engineered now by the Federal Reserve, of course, that drove up those interest rates. And again, they did this to try to bring economic growth down, to bring inflation down to 2%. The economy was overheated. And the principal mechanism for influencing economic growth and its byproduct of inflation is right here, the federal funds rate, also known as the Fed funds rate, aka the overnight bank lending rate, the rate at which banks can borrow from one another overnight. And why would a bank do that? Because banks need a certain amount of reserves inside the bank to make loans outside of it, and occasionally banks are up against that constraint. When this rate is set at a low level, banks are more likely to borrow from one another, thereby shoring up their reserves, thereby lending more aggressively in the economy. When these rates are set at a relatively higher level, banks are less likely to engage in such behaviors. Now, again, this burst of inflation shows up in early 2021. The Federal Reserve sees that in the data. We all do. In 2021, they do nothing about it. They keep interest rates as close to zero as was possible. Because they view that inflation to be transitory, a word we all know. A synonym for transitory is fleeting. They think this is almost purely supply chain driven. The supply chains normalize post-pandemic as employees are rehired by their employers. Inflation just naturally abate to that 2% level we'd enjoyed for many years prior to the pandemic. Indeed, for many years prior to the pandemic, the Federal Reserve had a tough time actually getting inflation up to 2%. It was often stuck at 1.75% post-global financial crisis. The Federal Reserve realizes over the course of time it's not transitory. They seem to preside over the creation of a wage price spiral. So prices take off in early 2021. Employees notice, boss, I need a raise. I cannot afford my life anymore. Boss says, no problem, I'll give you a raise. I need you. The economy is coming back very, very quickly as the economy reopens. There's lots of unmet demand out there. I'll just pass along my cost increase to my customers and clients. Wage price spiral. Now, after about a year of this, the Federal Reserve starts to push back. They start to raise rates. March 17th of 2022, they raise rates. But that day, even then, they only, a token gesture, they raise rates 0.25%. But next meeting, they get more serious, 0.5 percentage points. Then 0.75 percentage points next 4 meetings consecutively. Then 0.5 percentage points. Then 0.25. Then 0.25. May 3rd of last year, 0.25. Pause in June. July 26th, 0.25. Pause for 8 meetings. Right here, these 8 meetings right here. And then September 18th, that half percentage point rate cut that the stock market loved. But if you look at it from a broader perspective, again, interest rates are still quite high. And I'm going to make the case that this economy has some further weakening in front of it. I'm going to make that case based largely on theoretical grounds. I have to admit, in the minority on this, and I'm tired of being the minority. I don't mean this, by the way. I'm okay with this. I mean in terms of opinion. Because a lot of economists will say, look, if the economy has managed to negotiate the higher interest rates of the past, undoubtedly it can handle the lower interest rates to come. But I turn to something called economic theory, monetary theory in particular. I won't go through this entire slide, but I want to pick out this first bullet. It's a quote from the highly respected, highly regarded President and CEO of the Atlanta Federal Reserve, Raphael Bostic, who says, quote, a large body of research tells us it can take 18 months, 2 years or more for tighter monetary policy to materially affect inflation. You say, Anirban. Of all the things that have been said during this presentation, that is the most nonsensical, and that says a lot. Because you yourself just said the Federal Reserve has been raising rates since March of 2022, and that over an overlapping period, inflation went from more than 9% to less than 3%, and by some indications, less than 2%. Clearly, tighter monetary policy has had a material effect on inflation. Perhaps, but I think there's been at least one other major factor at work. And that factor is the improvement of supply chains. Now, I'm not suggesting to this audience that supply chains are perfect. Clearly, they're not. You can see what's happening in the South China Sea with the Chinese Coast Guard and fishermen from the Philippines and Vietnam, so on and so forth. You can see what's happening with Houthi rebels, Somali pirates in the Red Sea, and the effect on volume through the Suez Canal. You can see low water levels of the Panama Canal, bridge collapse in Baltimore, lockout of railroad workers at 2 Canadian railroads, all those things. I'm not saying supply chains are perfect. No. But they're better than they were, more reliable than they were in late 2021. And here's what happens as supply chains improve in the context of unmet demand. Let's take new cars as an example. For a while, Americans were having a tough time finding new cars in dealership lots. So what did? They bought used cars. What happened to the price of used cars? Skyrocketed. But then all of a sudden, new cars began to show up on dealership lots. All of a sudden, used car prices were not rising so rapidly. In fact, they've fallen about 10% over the past year. Moreover, there was frenzied waiting demand for those new cars. So as they showed up on the lots, they flew off the lots. So what you get as supply chains improve in the context of unmet demand, you get tons of transactional volume as that supply meets that waiting demand, and you get less inflation because there's less scarcity in the economy. And we've seen a fair amount of economic growth in this country the last couple of years, and we've seen less inflation. My view is that the impact of these higher interest rates has yet to fully permeate the economy, the so-called lag effects from higher interest rates. And now I'm not, again, saying that these interest rates have had no effect. I'm saying that there's more downward pressure to come, and more on that in a moment. Again, there's been some effect from these interest rates. So let's look at the housing market, for instance. Again, 2 interest rates of interest, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate in blue, the 50-year fixed mortgage rate in green. These data come from Freddie Mac. And according to Freddie Mac, over the last week, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate in America, 6.44%. And you say, Anirban, assuredly you're not going to make a big deal out of 6.44% 30-year fixed mortgage rates, right? Because I can remember when mortgage rates were 18%. I remember when they were 15%. Again, fair enough. But to millennials and Generation Z, the youngest members of our workforce, these rates are preposterously high. They've not seen this before. And that's who's really dropped out of the home purchasing marketplace. It's been that would-be first-time buyer, frustrated by lack of inventory, high prices, and by their standards, extremely high borrowing costs. Now, as I move toward the tail end of this presentation, I want to share with you a number of leading economic indicators because I want to pivot from a discussion of what's been happening to a discussion of what's likely to happen going forward. Here's a leading indicator. This is the U.S. Mortgage Loan Applications Composite Index. Why are mortgage applications a leading indicator? Because often the journey to the settlement table begins with a mortgage application. That's the first indication that somebody out there now seeks to transact. Now, because mortgage rates have actually been sliding for much of this year, we've actually seen a bit of a pickup in mortgage applications, but they're still about 75% below their 2021 peak. So what does that tell us? It tells us the number of ready buyers has been dramatically truncated. We don't have as many ready buyers out there. So you say, Anirban, if the population of people ready to transact has fallen so dramatically, housing market must be in horrific shape. But by many measures, as you know, it is not. Let's take home sales prices as an example. Home sales prices as measured by the S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Home sales prices in America have never been higher, which, by the way, lends some credibility to my assertion that maybe these higher interest rates have not had such an impact on price levels, because the one price you would expect to be most impacted by higher interest rates is right here, home sales prices, record highs. You see the increase in home sales prices during the pandemic and early stages of recovery therefrom right here? That's a 35% increase in U.S. home sales prices in a very short period of time. And of course, during the pandemic, our behavior changed. We're spending more time at home, so we wanted more square footage. We wanted room for home offices and home gyms. We wanted one room just for the Peloton. I mean, anytime you see a Peloton advertisement, the only piece of furniture in that room is the Peloton. That's how we Americans seek to live. You buy a Peloton, you put it in a room, lock the door. And then when people visit, of course, you open it back up, you splash some water on it, that kind of thing. But then, of course, pandemic ended and mortgage rates took off. So what was I thinking naively? that we'd give back a meaningful chunk of those home sales price gains generated during the pandemic. Didn't happen. What did I fail to fully appreciate? What did I get wrong? I understood quite neatly that the population of buyers had shrunk because of these higher mortgage rates. What I failed to fully appreciate was that the population of sellers had shrunk so dramatically as well. Because if you're sitting in Westminster, Maryland, or Finksburg, or Manchester, where it happens to be, or Sykesville, with a 30-year fixed mortgage rate of 2.75%, where are you going? Yeah, exactly. You're going to have to be carted out of the house. You're going to leave that house in an ambulance. And so you don't have many buyers. You don't have many sellers. So at the end of the day, you're stuck with a quite high equilibrium price. Now, of course, these dynamics impact construction as well. So here's another leading indicator. This is U.S. residential building permits, and permits are a leading indicator because if you're a builder, you've got to pull a permit before you build. The orange line at the top there, that's your single-family building permits, and that does not look so bad, especially if you ignore the bubble period of 2004, 2005, 2006 when we were building too many homes. It doesn't look so bad. So, Anirban, how is that possible? You just said the millennials, our largest generation, most populous generation, are having a tough time transacting. Why are single-family builders pulling that many permits? Because there are so few existing homes for sale that single-family builders are spying opportunities to meet unmet demand. Actually, the loss of momentum is in the green line. That's multifamily. That relates to future apartment construction. So Anirban, how is that possible? If the millennials can't find a house that they can afford, they have to live someplace. I mean, they can't live with their parents forever. Well, they can try, but they shouldn't. Then they're going to be leasing apartments. I would think under such economic and demographic circumstances, we'd see a lot of momentum in this category, multifamily building permits. Why don't we? Because increasingly, developers are having a tough time lining project finance. And that's some of the effect of these higher interest rates. And one of the things that we had last year was the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And though those failures had almost nothing to do with real estate exposure, still banks seem to have become, in general, a bit more skeptical in their lending, maybe a bit tighter lending standards, and regulators have become more assertive in their regulating. And again, this extends beyond the multifamily segment to engulf certain segments of commercial real estate. Another leading indicator, this is the Architecture Billings Index. It's a reflection of how busy architects are. So you see the 50-yard line running west across that slide in black. Any reading less than 50 signifies that architects are less busy this month than they were last month. Well, we just got a reading yesterday for September. It was the 14th consecutive month that the ABI was less than 50. Architects are getting less and less busy month by month by month. And why is that a leading indicator? Because if architects are less busy upstream designing projects, construction firms are less busy downstream building them eventually. And again, this is some of the effect of these higher interest rates. And certain segments of, again, commercial real estate are in quite bad shape. Let's talk about that. That's the ugly. The US office market. Now, economists can paint this with too broad a brush. There are certainly office markets that are in decent shape, particularly in suburban America. A lot of the issues with the office market are in older central business districts and the older buildings therein. Nonetheless, when you look nationally, based on CoStar data, the US office vacancy rate continues to rise, despite the fact that the US economy has been growing and adding jobs. So according to CoStar data, which are very expensive data as it turns out, at the end of the second quarter of 2024, the US office vacancy rate was 13.9%, but that's a lie. Not because the data are not good, but because it can be misleading, because even vacant office space is not deemed to be vacant if it is still leased. But as lease renewals come up, you'll continue to see upward pressure on office vacancy rates, and so you have a growing number of building owners who are facing higher vacancy, their rental revenues are falling, and now they have to refinance their mortgage. That's that debt maturity wall everyone talks about. $3 trillion in commercial real estate related debt matures over the next 5 years, and the big years of refinancing are in front of us. Who's going to refinance that debt? That's the question. And because a lot of people don't want to touch these office buildings financially or otherwise, they continue to lose value. I'll give you an example. About 3 months ago, the Wall Street Journal featured downtown St. Louis, a beautiful historic American city, much like Baltimore. The tallest building in downtown St. Louis is the 44-story AT&T building. In 2006, that building sold for $205 million. It just sold for $3.5 million. Downtown Baltimore, 1 South Street, which used to be the Alex Brown building, now the Stiefel building, but won't be for much longer. That building sold in October of 2015, and 2015 was a difficult year for Baltimore, but that building sold for $66 million. It just sold last summer for $24 million. I mean, and you see this all across the country. Now, we of course care about the building owners. They might be losing money. But we also care about the fact that banks could be exposed to those buildings. That's their collateral. Banks take haircuts. And that could make them more skeptical in their lending, make capital less available. that kind of balance sheet hit. Now, that takes me finally, good, bad, and ugly. Let's go now to, well, actually, one more slide. These are the highest downtown office vacancy rates in the country. So this is from CB Richard Ellis, CBRE. The highest downtown office vacancy rate is in San Francisco. They're screaming towards 40%. You might have heard that the company, now X, formerly known as Twitter, is vacating downtown San Francisco, creating another large hole in that central business district. By the way, there is some good news from San Francisco. My older daughter, Kimaya, who has been on my payroll for a year, just got a job with Google in downtown San Francisco. So big news for me because she's now off my payroll. So it's one of the reasons I'm actually in a pretty good mood this year, you can tell. And good news for her and Google as well. So anyway, but Los Angeles, humongous market, 31.5% vacancy. And again, the issue here in my mind, macroeconomically, is banks could be exposed to some of these losses as buildings continue to lose value. Okay, enough of that. Again, like I say, let's go to the forecast. This is Clint Eastwood from the Dirty Harry films. There are 5 Dirty Harry films. The first one comes out in 1971 called Dirty Harry. The character's name is Harry Callahan, and in that movie, Harry Callahan is a partner. The partner's name is Chico Gonzalez, and Chico Gonzalez is played by an actor who would later show up during the Seinfeld episodes playing the part of Poppy, the unhygienic restaurateur, just a movie and TV history in which about 8 of you has some interest. So let me move on with some of these leading indicators. And again, we have to start with the consumer. Can I have a downturn without the consumer? So this is the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment. How is the consumer feeling right now? Miserable. And that might have some implications for 2 weeks from now, roughly. But they do not feel good. Again, some of the macroeconomic statistics, unemployment, so on and so forth, look quite good. Record stock market, record oil production, all these kinds of things. It's that inflation, of course, that has people upset. So consumers are quite glum. Basically, consumer sentiment at levels we might have seen in 2010, 2011, during the initial aftermath of the global financial crisis. And they're not the only ones who are pessimistic. One of the things that you have noticed recently is that a number of larger firms have been announcing layoffs. So Boeing is a very good example. Last week, 10% of their global staff, 17,000 jobs, will be destroyed. And again, more pressure on Boeing as this strike persists among the machinists. And so we're going to depend a lot on small businesses to create the next generation of jobs in this country during this cycle. But here's the thing, small businesses have become more pessimistic too. This is from the National Federation of Independent Business. It's their index of small business optimism. Question Small Business America, is it a good time to expand your business over the next 3 months? In September, only 4% said yes. Akin to what we saw in 2008, 2009 during the global financial crisis. If you survey small businesses, they'll tell you my number one issue often, inflation. All my costs are going up, and because the economy is getting a bit softer, it's harder for me to pass along my cost increases to my customers and clients. My margins are shrinking. And when my margins are shrinking, I'm not hiring. So you can expect, and of course, for the next couple of months, the jobs there are going to be noisy because of Hurricanes Helene and Milton. So it's going to, because people get hired to rebuild too. So you get job growth, but you also get a loss of jobs from damaged businesses, that kind of thing. So it's going to be unclear. But after that period, you might expect to see further slowing in the US job market. And by the way, the hires rate has already fallen. So the hires rate is the number of people hired in any given month divided by the number of people receiving a paycheck in any given month. It's fallen to a multi-year low. So the job market is starting to fall apart just a bit. And that's the fuel for that consumer segment, obviously. And the consumer's already deeply in debt. So you can start to see some unraveling of this virtuous cycle. And by the way, the unemployment rate during the cyclical nadir, this cycle was 3.4%. It's not up to 4.1%. And that increase has triggered what's called the Sahm Rule Recession Indicator. This indicator, created by a very clever economist, Claudia Sahm, who out the Federal Reserve in 2019, created a rule that I've summarized for you in that text box. It gets at how rapidly unemployment is increasing because unemployment begets unemployment. So when the factory up the street lays off workers, the retailers on Main Street might lay off workers, and that affects the dry cleaner and the restaurants and so on and so forth. They lay off workers. So the labor market can become untidy very, very quickly. This index is structured such that any reading of 0.50 percentage points or above signals that either recession is here or forthcoming. The reading in September, 0.50. I'm not saying this means recession is coming. Again, this is largely theoretical. But if you apply her rule to all the recessions since the 1970s, that rule is coincident, the trigger of that rule is coincident with all of those recessions. And some other indicators. This is the Conference Board's Index of Leading Economic Indicators. There's actually 10 leading indicators all bundled to one composite index being graphed for you here. It's an index that predicted the 2001 recession, predicted 07, 08, 09. I have to tell you, I've become quite pessimistic in this presentation, haven't I? If Elaine had gone out with me in high school, this is a totally different presentation. But she went for Brett Burke, so this is what you're going to get. And my feeling is the index in this recent dip is saying, or is picking up the lag effects from these higher interest rates we're still living with. Those theoretical effects. So a lot of theory built into my forecast, as it turns out, but a lot of economists don't subscribe to such theories. They look at the economy and say, it's doing just fine. It'll continue to do just fine. There's momentum there. And they're not wrong about that. There is momentum there. Which brings us to my final slide. Go where we're looking and look where we're going is a more recent, is a line from a recent Clint Eastwood film, 2021's Crime Macho. It was not a box office sensation by a stretch of the imagination, but was a critically acclaimed film. This is a film that Clint Eastwood not only acts in, but also directs and produces. The gentleman has more than 40 directorial credits to his career. He's one of America's most prolific movie directors and also movie composers, composing the scores for movies like $1 Million Baby and Mystic River. Mystic River, as you know, a very sad movie starring the likes of Sean Penn, Timothy Robbins, and Kevin Bacon. This movie, again, comes out in 2021. The gentleman was born on May 31st of 1930. So as this movie comes out, he is 91 years old. He is old enough to be President of the United States of America. That just gives you some sense. It's really quite remarkable, really quite remarkable. So look, we're a deeply indebted society currently facing high borrowing costs. That's what makes me pessimistic regarding the near-term outlook. And the holiday shopping season will be fine. But at some point in 2025, I expect this economy to weaken a bit further, and it'll surprise some folks, I think. Geopolitics, federal elections don't help, source of additional concern, distraction, risk. You might have heard that the North Korean military personnel are now in Russia, ready to be shipped off to Ukraine. So that conflict continues to escalate, and of course we've got other conflicts escalating in other parts of the world, as everyone knows. So it will come nearly a year after initially anticipated, but recession or near recession, something weaker, I think is coming at some point in 2025. We shall see, but that's my forecast for the year. Hopefully I've left some time for Q&A. I have. Hey, thanks a lot for the opportunity. Carroll County Chamber of Commerce. Great. Any questions from this audience? Any questions whatsoever? Yes, sir. Right, so the question is, I talked about the fact that a lot of people are taking on more credit card debt, that people have become more delinquent and so on and so forth, but they've continued to spend, that kind of thing. Has that turn to credit delayed recession? Absolutely, right? Because I have an opportunity to maintain my spending by turning to the debt markets, back to the credit markets. I borrow more, continue to spend, and the retailer doesn't know if I'm paying my credit card balance or not. They just know that I'm spending with them, right? Or at the restaurant, or whatever it happens to be. But at some point, what happens? The consumer runs out of steam. They can't borrow anymore. And if they start losing their jobs, that means even more Americans are put under significant financial pressure, because imagine you've maxed out this credit card, and now you lose your job. Now think about what has to happen to spending. So this is the kind of dynamic I worry about. I don't think, we're looking at anything like a 2008, 2009. I'm not saying that. But I'm looking at a period of greater economic weakness, in part because of diminished consumer spending at some point in 2025. And yes, the availability of credit is one of the reasons that we have seen some of that weakening already. Any other questions here? Yes. Right, so the question is, what effect will the conversion of office space to residential space, office buildings to apartments, have? Actually, we've been seeing that for many years, as it turns out, decades. The conversion of, even before the pandemic, there was a lot of conversion. Downtown Baltimore, a number, Stanball Building, others were converted from office buildings to apartment buildings. And generally speaking, it was quite successful, as it turns out. And people have been looking for housing. But architects will tell you that many buildings cannot be converted from office to residential. It could be ceiling heights, egress, ingress, whatever it happens to be. And by the way, converting a building is enormously expensive. So the rents you have to charge to support that are very, very high. Americans have rent fatigue right now. During the pandemic, they could afford more rent. They had all this excess savings. Now, savings are gone. So what you're already seeing in certain markets, Nashville, Tennessee, where I spoke yesterday, Austin, Texas, rents are falling. Now in Nashville, Tennessee, landlords are offering 2 months free rent. They overbuilt that market. If you've been to downtown Nashville, you know how much they've built recently. It's incredible. It's fabulous. It's beautiful. It's safe. It's walkable. But they overbuilt. in certain segments. So rent is now falling. So it's very difficult to get these things financed. So it's a partial solution. And by the way, it might surprise people, actually more hotels have been converted to apartments than office buildings recently. And why is that? Because hotels are meant for residential living. So it's just easier to convert them physically. So yeah, it's not a panacea. A lot of these Class B and Class C office buildings in downtown Baltimore, where the vacancy rate is now 30%, are going to stay office buildings. And somehow the city is going to have to find a way to have these occupied. Otherwise, it's going to continue to lose that tax base. Any other questions here? Yes. It's like 3,000, but wait, go ahead. It doesn't matter. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah, this is a very good question, a bit technical, but it's a great question. Question is, look, I said that the population of people living in Carroll County with a job is lower than it was pre-pandemic. I think the number was 3,400 something, but set that aside, whatever it was. And his question was, does that include sole proprietors? It should, because to the extent that the survey by the Bureau of Labor Statistics also captures people who own businesses, LLCs, subchapter S's, whatever they happen to be, they should be captured because they're going to report themselves as being employed. Right? I have my own business, I'm generating revenue, I'm employed. So, I mean, many Uber and Lyft drivers consider themselves, entrepreneurial. They own a business, they think. They own their business on that Lyft or Uber platform. Same thing with people on Airbnb and so on and so forth. They think of, they're working. It's just that they're using that platform. They're part of the gig economy, we call it, of course, but they're working. So, no, they should be captured. They should be captured. I think what you have here is a significant pickup in the number of retirees living here in Carroll County. And Carroll County is a fabulous county, and people know it. And that's why the growth pressures are going to be just massive going forward. By the way, it'll be interesting to see how this community, deals with that, right? Because I know that this community can rally politically. I've been watching what's happening with this electricity these lines. This community, when it gets its gander up, boy, my goodness, just step out of the way, you know what I'm saying? So, and I think that's great, by the way. I think that's great that the community has rallied around, an issue. But we'll see how you handle growth, because you've seen a lot of growth pressures. You haven't seen anything that you're going to see in the next few years, because you have not seen the kind of disenchantment. And I mean, places like Howard County and Baltimore County have been very happy places. All of a sudden, some people are not that happy with the schools in Howard County. I can tell you they're very upset with the schools in Baltimore County. By the way, I'm very fond of the schools in Baltimore County. My wife is principal at Hillcrest Elementary School in Catonsville. So but there's lots of disenchantment there. That's a lot of pressure on Carroll County, where the school system is held in very high esteem. Any other questions here from this audience? Yeah, I thought there was a hand. I keep ignoring this side of the room, and then I'll get to you, sir. Yes. Well, I hope you heard him, because what he basically said was that what I've said makes some sense. There's some salience and relevance there. So I hope that you heard that. And I really appreciate that. He said that the labor market is tight. It's hard to find sufficiently skilled, motivated workers. And the fact that many of his customers are having a somewhat greater difficulty financially financing the services that he delivers to them, and of course, much needed services. So thank you very much for that input. There was a question over here. I saw it. Yes. Right, so his question is any predictions on the U.S. construction industry. So one of the things I do is I serve as the chief economist for Associated Builders and Contractors nationally. I serve as the chief economist for the Construction Financial Management Association. I serve as the chief economist for the Modular Building Institute. I serve as the chief economist for the Sheet Metal and Air Conditioning National Association, called SMACNA. It's a group of union contractors. A lot of them are California. So I do a lot of construction economics. I think the outlook differs based on the segment. So if you're talking about public works, the outlook is fabulous, right? Because you've got, November 15th of 2021, President Biden signs the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, $1.2 trillion package, $550 billion of new money. So among the leading construction categories are water and sewer. highway and road and bridges, those kind of public segments, that's going to stay hot. Healthcare. Healthcare, I'm told by contractors, continues to be a major source of new work for them. And of course, during the pandemic, it was revealed that we don't have enough healthcare delivery capacity, certainly not inpatient capacity, but also not enough outpatient capacity, and that's where the growth has been, ongoing outpatient capacity clinics, so on and so forth. So those segments will be strong. Hotel market, very weak, because business travel has not come back with a vengeance, even though leisure travel has. Office market, extremely weak. Energy sector, questionable, it depends on the election. So if Donald Trump wins this election, I think you'll see the building of the Keystone Pipeline runs through the spine of the country, lots of construction jobs from that. My guess is Kamala Harris is elected, you will not see the Keystone. I'm not saying that's good or bad, by the way. That's for people to decide. But again, different policy making along that dimension. So it's a mix. It depends on who you are as a contractor. You're going to see some contractors fail because they're invested in segments that are not performing particularly well. You're going to see other contractors make more money than they've ever made before because, for instance, they're involved in data center construction. You're going to see a fair amount of data centers in this part of the country, as it turns out. Those contractors specialize in that kind of construction, the shells of data centers, the internals of data centers. They're going to do very, very well. So it depends on the segment. The woman next to you had a question. Yes? Yes. Right, so our question is about education, and she points out that there is a fair amount of financial literacy in the population, of course, that we don't educate people in various categories of endeavor, skilled blue-collar jobs, those kinds of things, all kinds of. No, our education system, I'm not talking about Carroll County, but if you look nationally, it's broken. We are not teaching people the things they need to know to live a stable life in many cases. And we are not training people sufficiently in jobs that we need to get done. So we do not have enough machinists in this country. We don't have enough carpenters. We don't have enough welders. We don't have enough mechanics, so on and so forth. And so we can't alter our built environment. We can't reshore as much production back to America as we otherwise would be able to. A good welder in this country can make low six figures. We don't have enough of them. So all kinds of issues here, and I think one of the things that's happened in education, of course, is about teaching to the test, getting people to pass these various assessments so they can graduate. It's all been about college preparedness. I'm not saying that's bad. A lot of us have gone to college, and that's been a very important part of what we've accomplished. But it's not for everybody. And as a result, we need a lot of educational reform. Now, I don't think educational reform should simply take the form of throwing a ton of money at the existing system. And some people think that will get you there. You just throw a ton of money at the existing system, everything will be fine. I don't think that that's true. I think if you're going to throw a ton of money at the educational system, also reform that educational system. Really reform it in terms of what we teach, pathways to graduation. I think there should be two pathways to graduation. Not just teaching the test, passing various assessments, and getting ready for college. There should be another, which is what we want to call at one point vocational, but that's now pejorative. So you call it career and technical education, so no one knows what you're talking about. But it's training people for certain occupational categories. I think we should do that, and that should be a very highly respected pathway to graduation, as respected as the college path. Because you need all kinds of people to make an economy function. So, thank you for bringing that up. It's obviously very important, and there's lots of upside there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I keep taking questions up here. Is there anyone in the back that has a question? There, right there. I'll go to the very far corner, and then I'll go to you. Yes, go ahead. Yeah. No, you, madam. No, I love that kind of comment. So what she said is she completely agrees with me. It's a very valuable comment. But here's the thing. Here's what's happening. It's not about county school, Baltimore County. I'm a Baltimore County resident. It's not about Baltimore County schools. It's that people feel like you can no longer go to Towson at night and feel safe. You can no longer go to White Marsh at night and feel safe. That we never felt that before. We've taken a lot of pride as a community in downtown Towson. But now, you know, I feel very uncomfortable taking my kids there at night. So in Carroll County, I don't feel that dynamic. So in any case, this county is going to face a lot of growth pressures, and it needs to deal with those productively. It needs to take that as an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to create more tax base, to create more workforce, to create more economic dynamism, to develop downtown Westminster in a way that's never been developed before, which I think would be a useful outcome, by the way. So there's an opportunity here. There's a question to your, yes, go ahead. Right, so that's a very good point. So Governor Wes Moore, and we probably have the most handsome governor in the country, I would say. A jaw sculpted from granite. I see a lot of nodding heads there, including among certain men. So that's okay. That's okay. But my feeling is this: that the gentleman who one day will be campaigning in Green Bay and in Detroit Metro and so on, he has yet to figure out how to grow an economy. And so one of the things that he has done, we need to grow our tax base. You can't have a situation in which Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County are losing population, and the state is utterly stagnant. You might have noticed that Moody's just put a warning on our AAA bond rating, right? They gave us a kind of a negative outlook. They didn't take away the AAA bond rating, don't get me wrong, but they gave us a negative outlook. We're on notice. We've got to pick this economy up. But we have some really onerous tax rates, 8.25% corporate tax rate, really high personal income tax rates when you add in the local piggyback taxes. We're not growing. We are building towns like York, Pennsylvania. Right? We built that, basically, York, Pennsylvania. We pushed out so many people from Maryland. I meet more Marylanders on Marco Island in Florida than I do in Cockeysville. So the governor, of course, doesn't have that tax base. So actually, mid-year, he cut from the fiscal year budget $148.5 million. What has he been cutting? Transportation and higher education. That is no way to build a 2024 or 21st century economy. It's no way. So we've got a real problem here. I think the policy making is completely upside down and backwards. Now, in answer to your question about construction, we still have a ton of money coming from the federal government. So that's giving the state some cover, as it turns out, to in the near term, next 3, 4, 5 fiscal years, to cut back on local government or state government outlays for construction, because that federal money is still pumping in. But at some point, this state is going to have a tax base to support its enormous ambitions for public education, red line, all these kinds of things. We can't afford it. My fear, of course, is what? That they're going to try to afford it by raising our taxes. But we also already have some of the most punitive tax rates in the country. That'll drive even more people to Virginia and Pennsylvania and Delaware and Florida and Georgia and the Carolinas. And of course, who moves out first? The people of means. They have the most flexibility. So anyway, hopefully I've addressed your question, but it's going to be the federal funds that are going to drive us for the next few years, obviously not state funds. So a couple more questions. One quick one, okay. You choose. You pick. Yeah, there you go, see? Right, so the comment is about U.S. Army recruitment. By the way, when I was on the Baltimore City Public School System Board, I never said this, by the way. I never said it. but I thought that more of our young people should head for the military. Excellent training, you have a job, you have a career, so on and so forth, but we have very few people from Baltimore City go into the military, as it turns out, well, for whatever reason. But setting that aside, so he said that I have no difficulty recruiting people, but I can't get them in because only 25% actually qualify, physically, emotionally, whatever it happens to be. We have got a lot of mental health issues among the younger generation, as it turns out. A lot of them are medicated. That can be a factor that precludes someone from joining the military, as it turns out. Other kinds of phenomena at work as well, and so that tells us we're a fairly unhealthy society. And a lot of this lack of health is among the youngest of Americans. So we've got some real issues here. There's no question about that. But there's nothing that you can do other than invite me back for 2025. So thanks a lot for the opportunity. It's been a privilege. Fist bump you. My hands are all sore.
Nice job, Anirban. How about another round of applause? And he is invited back for next year. He will be here next year. I don't think we have the dates just yet. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our sponsors. Denise, do you have a second just to come up real fast and give a quick plug? There's a flyer that you all have in front of you about another meeting we have coming up November 21st, and one of our speakers is our very own Miss Denise Beaver, and she's going to tell you quickly what it's all about.
Good morning. We have the opportunity to join with the Chamber and also the Greater Baltimore Committee to invite them to come to Carroll to talk about their All-In 2035 plan for the next 10 years. And so we're going to do that on November 21st at the Portico. And the flyers are on the table, and you can sign up today. It's on the Chamber's website. So we're really looking forward to that because as Baltimore goes, so goes the rest of the state, right? We say that a lot. And so we really want to know they have a lot of great activity and momentum with the Greater Baltimore Committee in terms of working on the Tech Hub federal designation, as well as some of the other partnerships that they're building in the city and in the region. And Carroll County is a part of the Greater Baltimore region, so we're happy to be able to sponsor that program. So I hope you can join us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And on the flyer, you'll see there's a QR code. Sometimes you forget about meetings. Now all you got to do is scan it, and you can register. It's great for us to be able to partner with Denise and her crew. You know, the Chamber is an independent nonprofit. 100 years, we're not part of some larger kind of group like the U.S. Chamber, down to the state, down to us. And we're not part of the government, so we're independent. We appreciate all your memberships. We do have a special going right now. If you're not a member, if you know somebody who is, they pay for next year. They get the fourth quarter of this year for free. There's a lot of things you can use your membership for. Don't forget, we have a very active job board. We have an energy deal where you can save a lot of money through that. I also wanted to mention, well, obviously the big thing is to, as much as you can, to shop local. I don't know how much is spent at this time of the year as we're coming in, but I got to think it's a whole lot of money. And everybody buys gifts, and everybody does this. Whatever you can do to keep your money local, check our website. We've got about 600 and some odd actual members. If somebody's a member of ours, spend your money. If they're not, but they're still local, spend your money. Try to avoid Amazon. I say that all the time, and then sometimes I get home and there's like three like packages from Amazon. I'm like, Marsha, what are you doing? So, but honestly, wherever you can. And there's so many things that we're all worried about, and all this stuff up here. There's so much stuff that the average person cannot control. But you can control how a small business on a main street does on a certain day. So please keep that in mind. Tell others, buy gift cards to places. Don't get Amazon gift cards for like the holidays. Get one from a restaurant. Get one from the French Twist. We've got a Len over here. We've got amazing people here in Carroll that you should spend your money with. Please, please, please. Other than that, I don't think I had anything else. Oh, if you want to sponsor a meeting like this, we have a lot of chances for next year. You can contact me, and it's 1 minute to spare, so we did pretty good. This was a great meeting. You guys are great. This is an amazing community that we have here. I've been doing this job now for 14 years, and every time I'm just so amazed with all of you. You guys are awesome. So thank you so much, Anirban. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, all of the sponsors. How about a round of applause again, and have a great day.